The Missouri Supreme Court refused to take up an appeal from Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft in the fight over abortion ballot language. Joe McLean reports now on what this means and what comes next.
The court had found 13 different phrases within Ashcroft's version of the ballot language that were unfairly biased and argumentative. The court rewrote the language, and with the Supreme Court now refusing the appeal, that means the work to collect thousands of signatures from across the state can begin. Abortion rights advocates now have roughly 24 weeks to collect 171,000 valid signatures across 6 of Missouri's 8 congressional districts in order to secure a place on the 2024 ballot. After the state's Supreme Court announced it wouldn't consider the appeal over how the ballot language is written, Secretary Ashcroft released a statement saying he stands by the language he wrote and added, quote, "If these petitions make it to the ballot, the people will decide. I will continue to do everything in my power to make sure Missourians know the truth." Abortion rights advocates say the decision represents a major win.
I think it's a victory for the people of our state who deserve the right to be able to make their own decisions about their health care and take that decision to the ballot box.
Even if voters pass the initiative, though, it's possible the amendment could be challenged by Missouri's Republican-controlled legislature. After Ohio voters enshrined abortion rights in their constitution, the state legislature blamed its passage on foreign election interference and introduced bills to dismantle the court's ability to protect the newly established right. I asked Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey and Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft whether they are considering a similar effort, but I didn't get a response in time for this broadcast. In Jefferson City, I'm Joe McLean.